Welcome to Afterthoughts. This is the podcast where we give you our thoughts after we have watched something. I'm your host, Ryan King, and I just want to say, I finally caught up and watched something that we just keep saying that I'm supposed to watch. It's supposed to be good. I keep promising that I'm going to, and I know I never do that, but we finally got around to it. We're finally going to talk about it. Madam Web. We just had to put ourselves through it and get it out of the way.
You son of a bitch.
Fucking bringing us into it.
Yeah, missed out on so many awards. It's such a disappointment that it didn't get what it deserved.
Having watched it as well, Ryan, I agree. Fucking A.
How did it not get a Best Screenplay nomination at minimum?
Best audio dubbing, best effects work.
Oh man, yeah, the ADR is top notch.
The ADR is something else. No, we are talking about a decent movie. We're talking about The Iron Claw.
Ever since I was a child, people said my family was cursed. Mom tried to protect us with God. Pop tried to protect us with wrestling. He said if we were the toughest, the strongest, nothing could ever hurt us. I believed him. We all did.
Morning.
Pants tomorrow, please, David.
Perry, I want you to join your brothers in the ring.
Yes, sir. I love that.
Now, we all know Kerry's my favorite, then Kev, then David, then Mike. But the rankings can always change.
What do you want in life, Kevin Von Erich?
More ribs? I want to be with my family. Be with my brothers.
What do you like to do with your brothers?
Which is the story of the Von Erichs. But before we get too much further in that, let's introduce the other voices you heard there. We have John Garcia.
Ryan, my life has cheated me out of every other career opportunity, and I think that you just got to go into podcasting with me, because that is the ultimate way that we can prove to the world that nothing can hurt us. Nothing can hurt our income or our revenue or our success in our careers. So I'm happy to be here and podcast with you.
Yes, we're all in on podcasting, and we'll put all our energy into it. It'll save us from everything. Also joining us, Michael Dixon.
Someday this family will win the world champion podcasting belt. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but it will happen. It will be in this house.
Somebody's going to bring it home, and somebody might lose a leg doing it. But God damn it, they'll do it.
Mm-hmm.
We'll get it, anything to get it done. Yeah, so the Iron Claw is about a wrestling family that wrestles to get away from their shadows, their ghosts, their whatever you want to call it, their bad family life, honestly. Following the Von Erichs, a real wrestling family, Fritz, the patriarch, who wrestled as a bad guy and kind of never got his due, in his opinion, and his sons, who just tragedy befalls throughout the course of this movie. And even just saying that is an understatement to what the tragedy really was for this family, what really happened over the reigns of the Von Erichs. And I also say, so talking about the movie, I'll just kind of jump in a bit to my thoughts and we'll go around. Very well acted. It definitely tells a story. It does give this sad theme. I was surprised. You're right. It has a bit of an uplift at the end. It tries to go for it. It tries to kind of have something there. Not as much wrestling. Not as much wrestling promo, not as much the history on that end. I think because it just had to pack in so much to get the main big beats with the family. And so it doesn't really have anything of the Von Erichs' impact on wrestling or their rise or why they were a big deal or what their impact was or any of that. I think because you kind of had to do one or the other with how much there is to fit in to what's already 2 hours, 12 minutes. But yes, it was wrestling. I rather enjoyed it. The Von Erichs are a big deal, seeing their story told in another way. And knowing that there's other things, with Kevin still being around and giving interviews still, even recently, to go back and hear, his thoughts on his dad, on his life, on wrestling in general. And his sons wrestle now. His daughter wrestled for a hot minute, but his sons wrestle now. So then it's interesting to think about Kevin not fully walking away from something that kind of destroyed his family. It's mixed bag. But John, what's your feel after watching The Iron Claw?
Yeah, I've seen this movie like 4 times now. I would say. And it fucking crushes me in a different way each time. But the ending always saves me, and that kind of uplift. And the score also just does a fucking great job of kind of bringing you through it. Having been a kid in the 90s who fucking like loved the Texas tornado, it hits different. And like, it's not even like it hits different each time. It hits different as an experience to me. Having to watch it again and again and kind of come to terms with the fact that I loved that era of wrestling, and I really dug that wrestler, and I had memorabilia and action figures around the Texas tornado and Kerry Von Erich, and now knowing what went through like his mind, potentially like what he had to endure, I guess, as a person. It's not even so much that the movie adaptation is what happened, but just as a facsimile of what a human being could have endured, it just puts me in a different context. And I love it. Every time that I watch the Iron Claw, I have this different appreciation for wrestling. I have this different appreciation for what the family went through. And I don't know, man, it challenges me. Yeah. Like to really like wrestling, to continue to like wrestling. I was talking with somebody recently who really liked the Attitude Era of wrestling as opposed to the earlier like WWF era. And I was like, I don't know that I can like any era now. I don't know after this, even after The Wrestler, that I can like any era of wrestling, given how brutal it is, how taxing it is. I know I can appreciate it, but there's a certain aspect of it that I just can't get on board with anymore. And especially watching this story unfold and knowing the tragedies that will befall the family, and also knowing that the movie skimps on one of the Von Erichs because it was too depressing, because it was too intense. I just like, what do you really say to that? We were just talking about Saving Private Ryan and the fact that the U.S. government might have some policy that sends you in after like 3 sons die and they try to save a 4th. And then to have more than that in wrestling alone and not have
there's no one there
some
to
kind
save
of
you from
ripcord.
wrestling.
Yeah, there's no one there to save you. That's just fucked. And I really don't know how to deal with it. I know my most recent Letterboxd review talked about how the entire tragedy of Mike Von Erich it's the one thing in the movie that really always cuts deep to me, is just watching him try to recover and everybody being like, when are you going back to wrestling? And his brain freshly being stroked through a coma, just trying to process that and come back from it. I have no words. This movie just leaves me kind of like bare and raw after it ends. No matter how uplifting the ending manages to be, it's just like, fuck. I just can't. Yeah. So, I still love it. It's a great film. I think it's, obviously, as you said, well acted. I love the score to it. The message overall of just this kind of like hopeful, hey, the Von Erichs, they kind of pulled out of it. Kevin pulled out of it, is great. But the entire journey is grueling and brutal. And I'm really curious to hear, Dixon, what did you like a watch again? What did you think about it?
Yeah, so if you listened to our 2023 year-end retro spectacular episode, this was my perspective-changing movie for that year. I saw this on Christmas Day with my mom, and it was a very strange experience. Like, my mom was born and raised in Dallas, and she, knew of the Von Erichs and had like friends who knew them personally or who were fans of them. And so, it was just the two of us on Christmas, and we were trying to figure out what we wanted to do. Like, hey, let's go see a movie. that was the only one that we were both interested in. And so I was like, Mom, this isn't like an uplifting Christmas movie, right? This is going to be sad. I don't know how sad. I was not familiar with the Von Erich story before I saw the movie, but I knew from, hearing whispers that it was going to be very depressing. And she was like, no, it'll be fine. Let's go see it. I'm like, all right. So we went and, man, just, this movie is, I think it's like an incredible experience. Like the way that they display the tragedy that this family goes through is just so heartbreaking and upsetting. And, they set Kevin up as this character who is like a real family man who he's like, I just want to spend time with my brothers. That's really all I want to do. Like, it seems like wrestling for him is more of an outlet to just do something with his family rather than something that he's really passionate about in and of itself. And, that scene with him and Lily James early in the film where they're going on a date and she's like, what do you want in life? And he's like, I really just want to hang out with my brothers. And like, the wrestling is the way that I can do that. And then to see each of the brothers, obviously if you've listened to this podcast, we're going to spoil this. So if you want to watch the movie, please hit pause and go do that. But just seeing each brother just die and get injured and die over the course of the film, all these horrible things happening, it's just so upsetting to see. And like, just you would think that would leave Kevin as this shell of a person at the end of the movie. And there's this hopeful ending that is almost shoehorned into the end of the film that like, it really shouldn't be there, but somehow it works really well. And I don't really know how they pull that off. I feel like, you see movies that try to do that and add a happy ending onto something that shouldn't be there. And they usually feel like a studio note that's like, well, this is too sad. We can't leave people this depressed at the end of the movie. We got to make it happy. But the final 5, I don't even, maybe it's only like 2 or 3 minutes of the movie are so hopeful and uplifting that both times that I've seen it, I have left the movie feeling just hopeful. And the reason this was my perspective changing movie of 2023 was I was like, I've gone through personal tragedy with my dad passing away, and I have like, had implications of that in my personal and professional life, and I have tried to figure out how to deal with that. And like seeing this movie and the way that Kevin responds to all this tragedy is inspiring to some degree. And it's kind of, it's almost done post credit to some degree. There's some of it where there's that really touching scene with the brothers at the end, and we'll get into that. And the scene with Kevin and his kids is just so heartbreaking. But then the movie ends and they're like, it's like post credit sequence. Turns out Kevin got a big ranch, and all his kids and all their families moved there, and he is like having the life that he wanted at the start, right? It's like he wanted to just live on a big piece of land with all of his family, and so he would get to be with them all the time, and he got to have some version of that, maybe not the version that he thought he was going to get or that he wanted earlier in his life, but I think it's really touching and just a profound example of kind of the perseverance of the human spirit, that you can take all this horrible tragedy and push through and maybe still get something like what you wanted in life and have a happy existence to some degree, even if it's maybe not to the extent that you wanted it to be. So I thought this movie was pretty fantastic. Again, on second watch, I fucking bawled throughout the movie. Yeah. And just like sitting in my living room alone, just crying my eyes out watching this thing. The cast is fucking incredible. Like, Efron is as good as you have heard that he is as Kevin. Jeremy Allen White is very good. Harris Dickinson he steals a lot of scenes as David. I really loved him in Triangle of Sadness, and he's really great in this as well. And then John, you talked about Mike. Stanley Simons is so good in that role. The other characters are good as well, but really those 4 brothers are kind of where the heart and soul of this movie exists, and those 4 actors do an impeccable job of showing the kind of the vigorous spirit of those brothers, and then how it is broken down over the course of the film. And I don't know, this movie kind of feels like a magic trick to me, the way it just abuses you with tragedy throughout, and then at the end it shoehorns in this hopeful note, and like you buy it, or at least I did. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe that worked. Like it shouldn't work, but it did.
Yeah.
And it makes me like, I'm still sad at the end of the movie, but I'm like, you know what? Maybe there is some hope in this world to actually achieve some form of happiness despite whatever tragedy is out there. So I'm excited to get into this in more detail with you guys. Ryan, I'm really excited that you have now seen it, given your wrestling love, and I have no context for this historically, or I didn't know anything about these guys before the movie, so interested to hear more from you about your perspective.
Yeah, I feel like we have an interesting group here. John, you grew up watching wrestling.
Yeah.
I'm later to the game on getting into wrestling, but that was definitely something you were into as a kid. We're all out of Texas. My dad's family was in East Texas, just outside Dallas. And my cousins and I, when we fucked around and wrestled, the Iron Claw was like the go-to move. Like that was the finisher. Like everybody knew. It's interesting. The movie doesn't necessarily get into the like fame per se, or the degree that it was. Wrestling was much more territory based at this time. TV's like a newer aspect of it, but in that greater Dallas Fort Worth area, East Texas, and honestly eventually all of Texas, the Von Erichs were like the fucking thing. Like they were the thing. They were hot. They were bringing people who didn't give a shit about wrestling into wrestling just because how they looked, how they talked. They were Texans, they were country boys, they were exactly what people wanted to see. At the top here, before we start digging in, we've mentioned a little, it is like Mental Health Awareness Month. We are going to talk about suicide. It's a major aspect of this movie. As always, get help, ask for help, call a suicide hotline. If you're ever having thoughts, anything, reach out to people. I'll also say, fuck Vince McMahon, and a lot of the wrestling and wrestlers are full of physical abuse, sexual assaults, just all kinds of shit. And they don't pay people, and they don't, take care of their injuries. They put their bodies on the line. Like, yeah, the more you learn about it, and I agree, John, it's like you sort of respect it more and respect it less.
Yeah.
It's hard to describe.
You respect the personal endeavor and you reject the corporate exploitation, I feel like is the main kind of like, it's the dissonance that you grow into as you understand what's going on.
And it really is something that people love so much to their core and want to do so badly that they'll not get paid well. They'll let their health go to shit and try to come back too early. They'll keep wrestling too long. They'll like lie about the injuries that they have, like just because they want to keep going. They just want to keep going. But then at the same time, they're constantly stabbing each other in the back, trying to spill spotlight from each other. Like it's such a crazy industry. So I think, and then Dixon, for your standpoint, you also don't know the history of the Von Erichs the first time you watched it. And I kind of am interested in that perspective of like, I'm going in and it's kind of that like sitting there waiting at the ticking bomb. And I also know exactly when the bomb is going to go off in the movie. And I think you probably got that experience, right? That like a second watching, but that first watching, how it hits and when it hits and like how many times, like how surprising and how that went, I wonder.
I am curious from that perspective because when I watched it as well, knowing about sort of the Von Erich curse, and I know going into it too, it depends because some people you could look up like what the Iron Claw is supposed to be about and know, and I don't know if you went in fully blind or if you like how you approached it.
I had heard some things that like, oh, this is a very tragic story and you know it's very sad, and I tried to avoid as much information as I could. I had seen the trailer, but and then I had just kind of heard things around the movie like, oh, the Von Erichs, that's really fucked up. But I didn't really know how tragic it was going to be going in. I knew it was going to be sad, but that was about it. And just seeing it unfold in the span of 2 hours and 12 minutes was just wild. Because like the first half of the movie is fairly happy. It's like you see the potential pitfalls in front of them and how fucked up their dad is and how toxic that environment is. But like the bond between the brothers is really great, and there's a lot of stuff to get into. And then over the last hour of the film, you just see all this tragedy unfold so quickly. Like I definitely wasn't prepared for that, the degree of just death and depression that I was about to experience.
Yeah, and that was kind of like what I thought about too, was just a modern audience watching it and not knowing anything about what the Von Erichs went through, because the first 58 minutes of it, really uphill. There's a lot of great positive things happening.
That Tom Sawyer montage.
Yeah,
Great.
the Tom Sawyer montage, so fucking good. Watching them fight together, and there's a few things that throw you off that are red flags. You get Kevin kind of getting that rib damage in the ring when he's going up against Harley Race.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh fuck, that seems kind of fucked up. And then you get him immediately kind of bouncing back and going into like a relationship that seems really positive for him. And you get David coming in and being announced as like the next, intercontinental champion or whatever the fuck. And they're like, all right, he's going to go here. And then you get a wedding scene. And the real turning point for me is David just fucking vomiting his guts into the fucking bathroom when he's like vomiting blood up. I was like, this is where it goes. Like, I remember when I saw this in theaters, I was like, man, there's a lot of happy shit happening. I just know there's going to be a pivot point and it's downhill. It's completely downhill from there. And that was the moment that I kind of felt like, yeah, this is going to get fucked really fast. I'm kind of curious, Dixon, did you clock that same thing when you were watching it, or were you kind of just like, all right, I don't really know where this is going to go beyond it?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely notice that Kevin's arc starts to turn at the Harley Race fight, and then with his dad pushing David ahead of him as the next like person to fight for a championship, you're like, all right, Kevin's arc is starting to go down, but at least he has this relationship, and generally the brothers seem happy fighting together and spending time together. But yeah, like when he's going to Japan and he's vomiting in the bathroom and Kevin's like, dude, I don't think you should go. You should like maybe see a doctor. And he's like, fuck it, I'll be fine. Classic rub some dirt on it mentality. It's just like, yeah, you really, it's not going to go well from there.
One interesting choice this movie makes is like time compression. John, you also mentioned they drop a son. There was one more younger brother, Chris, who maybe was in even a worse situation than Mike of not being physically. He was like 5'5", I think.
Oh.
And had asthma, chronic asthma, and the medication he took made his bones weak. But still, he pushed himself to wrestle. Yeah. And like that just continues to exemplify like the family and what they were into. I do, and I'm trying to remember because I've only seen it the one time. They just kind of gloss over Jack Jr. and just say like he died when they were young, but his whole situation was fucked up. He was out like playing in the trailer park and touched a live wire, electrocuted himself, and he fell over into a puddle of like melting snow and then drowned. Like actually, it was the drowning that killed him. This is when he was like 6, I think, right? And just that in of itself, right? You can know the impact that had to have had on Fritz and the younger boys that were, at least old enough to sort of remember, and then just continuing after as it goes on. The time compression, it does sort of make it seem like it almost feels like it's like a week after, a month after, like this, things just kind of move so quick and it doesn't really give you any,
boom, boom, boom.
Sense of like the time in between them. In the case you mentioned, Carrie, It was not too long after he won the belt that he had gotten into the motorcycle accident. He actually didn't have his foot amputated as part of the motorcycle accident. He had it injured, but he went back to wrestling too soon and continued to injure it, and then ended up having to amputate it. And I would venture to say probably, John, all the time you watched him, he was missing that foot, because I think that the whole WWF run he was already that, and that's like 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah, that was, we got out of that movie. I got out of that movie with my family. I went saw it with my brother, Mark, who's been on this podcast before.
What up, Mark?
And he and I had these glances at the end where we were just like, we just never knew. We felt complicit in something. It was really fucked up.
Oh, wow.
We felt complicit in encouraging that. And it was a deeply emotional moment for us to get out of this movie and realize that Kerry had that amputation, and that neither of us knew about it, and we both really loved his wrestling and encouraged it. It was fucked up. So it was wild.
Yeah, so I mean, can only get so much in this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to look at this family through the lens of the parents, and how, maybe it was the death of their first son, or what happened to them that turned them into these kind of robot monsters that exist in this movie. But, like, you have this touching story when they're at that family dinner where, Doris is like, Mike's musical just like his dad. And they're like, what the fuck, Dad? You played an instrument?
music?
Yeah.
And she's like, yeah, your father was classically trained in the clarinet, and he used to play me all these wonderful love songs when we were dating. And, you have these glimpses of like, hey, maybe they used to be normal people, right? And it's like, for the most part, you just see Fritz berating his sons and ranking them against each other, which is the most fucked up thing I've ever heard. Like, very early on in the movie, he's like, we all know my favorites are Carrie, then Kevin, then Dave, then Mike, but their rankings can always change. You got to work for it. And he's constantly pitching them against each other, but it's like, it definitely impacts their relationships, but not near to the degree that you would think it would. And like, they seem to still really love and care about each other, and kind of come together against their father, or not against, but kind of despite their father's pushing them and to be so competitive. Like, there's a real love there, and that's so interesting to me that they're able to push through that, not just fight like cats and dogs all the time. And then you have, they so clearly care about each other, and they know that their dad just wants them to win awards and compete. So like, there's that early scene where Kevin goes to his mom and he's like, Mom, Dad's pushing Mike too hard. Like, you got to say something. And she's like, that's between you and your brothers. You got to talk that out. That's what your brothers are for. Like, what the fuck? Like, it just, the parents are so disconnected from their children. They don't express any interest in actually wanting to have relationships with them. They just want them to go out and do shiny things and, bring back hardware to the house and win championships. And that's like, the mark of a good wrestling family, I guess. But, just seeing how broken they are, and whether it's probably to some degree from wrestling that Fritz went through, right? That damaged him as a person, that led to damage in his marriage and damage to his wife. And obviously their oldest son, Jack Jr., dying so young, and how that impacted their family. And I think, the movie doesn't really talk about Kevin's relationship with his sons, aside from that little scene at the end that's so beautiful. But it's, I think, really uplifting to see Kevin trying to kind of break that cycle and try to create a different environment for his kids. But the family dynamics there are just fascinating, and I think there's just so much that we could unpack in all of that.
Yeah, and there's so much contrasted to in how Kevin Von Erich, the reaction Kevin Von Erich had to this film as well, because I know there are a few scenes that were cut from this that humanized further Dottie and Fritz.
Oh, interesting.
In what they were going to do. Like, there is a scene that was cut where Fritz goes to church, and it is on his knees asking God why he's cursing his family. Like, he's asking and pleading to understand exactly why the Von Erichs are cursed. And those scenes were cut because it too much complicated what the story was and what the dynamic in the family was, which was that the dad was pushing too hard, and the mom was too dissonant and like just had too much faith that things would work out eventually in some way. And in that regard, I feel like I'm interested to see what those scenes are. I don't think that they are included within, the actual distribution of the Blu-ray for the Iron Claw. But I'm curious to know what that would have added depth-wise, if it would have added anything. But from understanding like the interviews that have been had about those deleted scenes, know that they were cut because it would have confused audiences. It would have confused them into like how they were supposed to read a lot of what happened in the tragedies. To not see Fritz constantly pushing his family, and in one scene suddenly out of nowhere to seemingly have him say, "Why are you doing this to us?" Would have been too on the nose, I suppose. And Kevin Von Erich had said that like his dad wasn't like that, even though his dad is the one who in the late stages of his cancer said, you ought to just put a fucking bullet to your head like your brothers did if you were a real fucking man, or some shit like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
He just said
pulled
some
a gun
really
on
fucking,
Kevin and said that.
Yeah,
Oh
he
my
just
God.
did some bold shit like that. But the fact that Kevin Von Erich still is like, they're too hard on my dad, given that, tells me that there's some layer of complexity beyond that I just don't understand. I can't fathom what the fuck that was.
Yeah.
And I'm
Kevin
really
said,
curious.
like, it wasn't my dad, it was the drugs. And I think that's pretty honest. Like you do have to get like the drugs, the
Like
wrestling, painkillers, steroids, coke,
Yeah. Any of
beer,
that.
all of it, and if you listen to stories of other wrestlers, Ric Flair comes to mind. Like he talks about how much like he was drinking and the shit he was doing. And he like went to a doctor at one point, and the doctor was like, well, how much do you drink? They ask you that or whatever. And he's like, he's like maybe 12, cases or whatever. And he's like, the doctor's like, over a week? And he's like, oh no, not a week. He was like, that was before I came over here.
Oh my God.
Like,
Yeah.
So it definitely was the lifestyle of wrestling that added so much more to it. And you could say like at any moment, why didn't they step away? But it's also the same thing I think that even today professional athletes can fall into of they don't have anything else.
Yeah.
They've invested so much into this and being this, and there's
This is who
nothing
you
for
are.
them to fall back on. And yeah, essentially what happened to Fritz. He went to play football, didn't work, and he had nothing. He had no out, and he lucked into wrestling. And there are plenty of ex-professional players who are wrestlers now because that at least gives them something. But if they weren't doing that, they don't have anything.
Dwayne The Rock Johnson couldn't play football for shit. He's now the biggest movie star in the world because of his wrestling career.
He went to Ballers, the HBO show. He's a football manager or whatever the fuck he does.
Yeah. So yeah, it's interesting because I mean you do have to zoom out and be like fucking wrestling did it to them. And if you watch like The Dark Side of the Ring, which they have an episode on the Von Erichs, episode after episode of The Dark Side of the Ring, you're like, wow, how much more fucked up stuff can happen to wrestlers? And it's like they're fucking murdering each other, they're dying in these bizarre ways, they're ODing at these weird times, they're like just so much stuff, so much tragedy. And it is like I mentioned football players like CTE, and there have been murders, suicides in that. Like there have been incidents. There seem to be constantly assaulting people in elevators. I don't know what the deal is with doing it in an elevator. It's either an elevator or a taxi, but that not really creating a culture of trying to deal with things. And I think that's part of it is this is a family at a time and in a part of the country where you sucked it up. You kept it inside. And that was the expectation, I think. And if everyone is that way, right? If you kind of get more in the light of like, Fritz was probably like a lot of dads in the South, in Texas, right, on their farm, telling their sons, suck it up, get back out there, rub dirt in it. Maybe he isn't, right? He isn't as bad if you can kind of paint that picture.
Yeah. But the movie did not. So unfortunately, you have a hyper focus on Fritz as being a terrible father, which it spoke more to the time and kind of the culture of how things were. And I mean, like, my dad talked about how his dad was just a drunk, like an alcoholic who abused him. And it just became kind of this thing where he was like, yeah, I mean, that was just kind of what happened. And like, I left that situation because I couldn't fix that situation. I got out. And it's kind of the same for Kevin, where Kevin eventually is just like, yeah, I'm fucking done. Like, I'm not going to be here anymore. I need to sell, the business that you built. And the digs in this movie that Fritz does toward Kevin are just so brutal.
Oh, man. Yeah.
When he's like, Carrie, you're carrying the title. I'm glad that you got it. After, Kevin fucking gave up whatever we were trying to do. That's really good for you, Carrie. Like, in front of Kevin. And it's just like, that fucking hurts. Like that, that's just such a brutal dig. And he knows exactly what he's doing. And that's before Kevin even sells the franchise. It just is this thing that he has to dig into him. So
yeah.
I think that the reflections of Fritz and how that football game goes when Carrie first comes back, and he's like constantly pitting them more and more against each other. Like, you're not hitting them hard enough. How'd you let him get away from you? Like, right, kind of digging them constantly. And that sort of pushing down of emotions, that then the cathartic release at the end of the movie where Kevin is sitting down and able to cry about it. And his sons come up and are like, we cry, right? Like, you can do that. It's okay. You can have feelings. You can express feelings.
Yeah.
Right. And then he gets up and he plays football with them, and you have the impression of what he's playing, that they're playing. He's not judging them. He's not telling you, right. He's just playing with them.
There's no like, you need to push your brother down harder, or you need to be chasing this person. And like, that was, Fritz was just like, Kevin, you're the fastest. No one can ever take that from you. You've always been the fastest of this family, like whatever. And telling Mike that he needs to push harder and all this other shit. Yeah. There's none of that for sure.
Yeah. Probably the two most heartbreaking scenes, I think, in this movie to me are one where, like, right after David's funeral, they go home. They're still wearing the suits from the funeral.
Sitting having beers.
And the dad is like, to Kevin and Carrie, he's like, guys, we can still get the title belt in this family. Like, David is not going to do it now because he's fucking dead. But like, one of you guys can step up and, you can bring the title home to this house. He's like dead serious. This shows no grief or anything. And it's like, well, like that is this maniacal man and how he is driving his family, and his singular vision is just that they can achieve the glory that he never did. It's just so fucked up. And then Ryan, you talk about that scene with Kevin and his kids at the end of the movie. It's like that line where he's crying, where he's playing football with him, and they walk up and they're like, Dad, what's wrong? And he says, I used to be a brother, and now I'm not. It's like, oh my God. Like, that is just a gut punch of a line. And Efron is great in delivering that. And it's just, man, it's just such an emotional film. And it just, every scene hits the way it's supposed to. It works. It does exactly what it's trying to do. And it's pretty wild to just see a movie like this executed so well. Like, typically biopics and movies that try to pull at your emotional heartstrings can fall into tropey traps that just don't work. And The Iron Claw avoids all of those, and just every scene hits exactly the way that they envisioned when they wrote the script,
Yeah. There's like even the scenes that I feel like this is a movie that could sucker people easily into what wrestling is and how to enjoy it and how to understand it in a way, because you get to see the promos. I know, Ryan, you said there weren't enough promos.
Yeah, I want to talk about this.
Yeah, by all means, use this as a jumping off board. But like, I feel like this had enough of the promos in some way to entice audiences to be like, okay, I kind of get what the allure of a wrestling promo plus the actual wrestling match would be. Like from Kevin talking about how the ring mannerisms and title belts are basically like promotions within a job, a regular job.
Yeah.
To the way that promotions are cut and how there is not this like, they try to improv and they fuck up constantly and they have to like reshoot it and redo it. And there's like these goofy moments and these interludes in it, to the actual actual product of it, which is, you know, this big grandiose machismo that is cheesy and fun and in its own way entertaining. I feel like there's a lot of elements of it that are pulled out at like 30,000 foot view for the audience to be like, oh, now I get it. I get kind of what wrestling could be about. I understand why it might be fun to follow these narratives and to dig into these things and whatever else. But I thought that this movie did it really effectively. Whereas like something like I mentioned, The Wrestler is significantly more like, here's how brutal this is on the human body. This one has moments that seem fun and could buy you into it.
Yeah. The Wrestler definitely gives you the like stapling a dollar bill to a guy's head. And you're like, why would anyone want to watch that?
Exactly.
I have no interest in this. And as you mentioned, like them talking right after the funeral, you know, again, who knows exactly when that conversation or what would happen. But from a time compression standpoint that this movie does so many other places, that's actually probably fairly true, because the match that Kerry has against Ric Flair is at the Von Erich Memorial Parade of Champion or whatever that they called it, which is one of those great wrestling things of like, you think he's going to win the belt and you think his brother's going to win the belt in the Von Erich Memorial. But to play off that tragedy that fast is so wrestling.
Yes.
It's so wrestling. Whatever happens, figure out, the first thought you have is like, how can I roll this into the story? Someone was a car wreck, how can I roll this into the story? Oh, someone else OD'd, how can I roll it into the story? Like, that's just the way it is. This is at a time where kayfabe, as they call it in the industry, kayfabe is where you keep up the persona, keep up the story. Yeah, that the truth is there. This is prime kayfabe era. It's interesting now how much they still try to keep it sort of blended, where it's like clear and not clear sometimes, but it ends up creating more confusion when you watch it because you're never really sure exactly what's real and what's not, instead of like kind of knowing it's all not exactly real, that it's much more of the show. But I do think that, when Kevin explains, right, where he gets asked, like, isn't it fake? Which is like asking someone with a tattoo, does it hurt? Like, you hear that question. Like, you know, you're going to get that fucking question. You don't want to hear it. But he has a really great response that I do think is a really good way to kind of explain to people how the wrestler themselves is having to work, is hitting the mat, is taking hits.
Yeah.
You know, maybe they're not all the things they look like they are. Maybe they don't all hurt the way they look like they hurt. But they still have to be good and do a good job to get to a belt. It isn't something that just, is like today's kindergarten awards that everyone eventually gets it. Right? Like there is an expectation and an earning, and you have to earn it with the fans, like not just like, you have to earn it in the locker room with the other guys. You have to earn it with your boss. You have to earn it with the fans. Like there's a lot to get to that. And that it is, what I always say is like, it's like watching the Batman and the Joker. I know Batman's going to win at the end of the movie. Like, why the fuck am I here if, if Batman doesn't eventually win? But it's the ups and downs of all of it. And the way they play it, and they explained it like just a quick moment with Harley Race of like, you don't get to win the first match. Like, you never get to win that first matchup. And either it's not for the belt, or Harley Race cheats, or Ric Flair runs away, right?
There's
And
some
then
sort of weird disqualification
Yep.
scenario.
Yeah, there's
There has
always
to
something.
They have to bide that time and build that narrative.
Yeah, and there's like, and the next time it's something slightly different, and maybe you technically win, but it isn't a way that you can win the belt, and then he runs away again. So now we got to do it in a cage, but then somebody lets him out of the cage, right? And as an audience member, you just keep getting pissed, right? It's like the Joker keeps getting away, and you're pissed, and you're pissed, and you're pissed, and the cathartic release of like finally, like they got it, they got the title, they put Ric Flair in his place, fuck him, rich man, the Von Erich, our kid won finally.
Yeah,
it feels good to you as even if like it was gonna eventually be that.
Yeah.
you're still into it because I mean that's there's a lot of movies that like we've seen that don't adhere to a specific formula of how you would expect a narrative to go. And it can really, if you're not doing it in the right way, you got to know the rules to break the rules is kind of the methodology behind filmmaking, especially if you're going to go off book. If you do something like you're breaking the rules without even knowing them, you get something like The Room, you get something like a Neil Breen film, and you're like, this is fucking awful for all the wrong reasons. But if you get something that breaks the rules on its own time, you get something like a David Lynch film. You get something that's a little more dreamlike, that's a little bit more like, I'm playing by my own. I understand exactly what I should be doing, but I really don't want to because I have this intention. And wrestling follows the same rules of like, hey, here's sort of the narrative that you're supposed to believe in. And if you believe in it, then eventually you will be rewarded by understanding these are the rules it plays by, these are the rules it can break, these are the times that it does. And the times that you get really frustrated is when it continues to play by those rules for way too long. It draws it out way too much, or you get like a Roman Reigns character.
Or they forget about something.
Yeah, they forget about something, and there's just kind of like this buy-in, and you're like, I don't fucking know what the fuck I'm doing here.
The last 15 years, there's been a lot of Poochie. Where's Poochie?
Yeah. And when Poochie's not on screen, you should be asking, where's Poochie? And that's really what they think that you should be saying, but you're not. And I feel like we're going to get into Ric Flair as well. I'm sure Ryan has a lot of gripes about the Ric Flair impersonation here because a lot of fans of wrestling did. I didn't personally mind it because I understood it was a different thing. This film is done in a different way, and it doesn't need to be that over the top, but also I get it. And so like you get those moments where I feel like it continues to buy you in. Harley Race, I love each time that a heel is on screen because they're doing their promo and they're doing it in a hammy way. And even if they're not doing it the way that it was supposed to be done to an authentic historical degree, they're still doing it in a fun way. Harley Race is like, you might get these Von Erich kids or whatever the fuck. And you also get Ric Flair, who I can't remember the actor's name, but the way he plays him, and he's just like, that's why I wear a Rolex watch and I have an $800 suit and I don't know how much that suit costs, but I would never wear that. Like I'd be embarrassed to wear it. And like, I've got a limo full of women waiting for me to go, woo, like that kind of shit. And you're like, all right, I understand exactly what this character is supposed to be. The epitome of machismo. And the like, I'm kind of curious too, Ryan, if you think as well that modern audiences would be like, wrestling wouldn't be this dumb if he had gone full Ric Flair and actually done some dumb shit. But like it's those moments are sort of muted in a way, but also they represent the facsimile that needs to be represented in the moment that they are presented to you as an audience member.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. If this was like The Wrestler, where there's no, like, these aren't real people that from real promos, from real matches that we're pulling, but we're using the beats and those kind of wrestlers, those stereotypes.
Yeah.
It works, right? And within the realm of the movie, I agree, it works. You're probably right. It probably comes off too bizarre. But what's weird is I'm like, to modern audiences who have turned on a WWE or AEW today would be like, this is too bizarre to believe. in other ways, like you turn on the Attitude Era, which was supposed to be the most realistic era, except like, I don't remember if Kane was coming back from hell, and the Undertaker
Was he a demon?
was undead.
Yeah,
and
he was a
there were
demon coming out.
Yeah, there were vampires for a hot minute.
Oh,
Right?
Quite attitude.
Yeah. There's always something a bit bizarre and over the top of it, and that's because they got to play to the back seats, right? Like that's the kind of thing that wrestling is. If you don't know which person you want to win by the time they get to the ring before they've even said a word, they've failed, right? They've got the music when they hit, what they're wearing, the way they walk, like what they do in that like 30 seconds to the ring, they sell you already, right? And that's where it's like it's got to be big, flashy, loud in order to get to that. Ric Flair is like fucking unbelievable. Yeah, if you go back and watch. But all of them, like David, the promo, he like grabs the mic away after Kevin's match. And he gives a pretty harsh promo that comes off good, right? He's like wings it and it comes off well. If you go listen to David's promos, he sounds like Ric Flair in the movie. Like he's turned up to the Ric Flair in the movie level, and Ric Flair's turned up to an even higher level. Like that's kind of more of what it is. And so they have like bits in here, and I think they used them carefully. Like Bill Mercer's in here, and we see quite a bit of him. He's honestly like Bill Mercer. Your interview guy is always a little bit vanilla newscaster,
straight
interviewer,
man newscaster.
Yeah, straight man, in order to let the other person shine so much and be so big. Even if their name is Gorilla Monsoon, they are still the one that's getting played off of, right?
Yeah.
And we see like the Freebirds for a second in the background, right? And they mention Michael Hayes. We didn't get into the storyline of the fake Von Erich, but he's there in a match where Kevin is like trying to tag in and the partner won't tag him in. Like little things like that where it's like, oh, if you know, you know. This movie kind of has those pieces. Yeah.
Yeah. Who is the other? Oh, God. Ryan, who's the guy who was stabbed in Mexico?
Oh, yeah. Gino Hernandez. So Gino Hernandez and...
It's not Gino Hernandez. It's somebody else, too.
Well, Bruiser Brody. Bruiser Brody was the one who got stabbed. Yeah, so there's a mention of Gino Hernandez and Bruiser Brody. And they have him in the background like they have a guy playing him but not talking.
They're predicting
the match,
what the
right?
match is going to be, and
Is this for one of the tag team matches where they're like talking how it's going to go?
They're going to go, David and Kevin are going to go up against Bruiser Brody and Gino Hernandez. And Bruiser Brody, there's a whole like dark side of the ring about how Bruiser Brody was just fucking like brutally murdered in Mexico before a match happened.
Man.
I think is how that goes.
It's still not really like clear like to steal money or to keep him from doing
because
it. Like
people somebody hated him, somebody did not like him some way like that, and like there's a wrestler who he fucking held him in his arms as he died and was like asking for him to do something, and it was just like when I watched this movie with Sasha, I was like, that's Bruiser Brody. He was fucking stabbed to death in Mexico. And Sasha was like, oh my God. I was like, yeah, wrestling's fucked. Like wrestling, so much of wrestling is fucked and can be interfered with like this. But yeah, like that was just like a wild kind of, they have so many of those nods in it that are like that. Where you're like,
yeah.
Something
and I think
happens.
it's interesting that they shied away from really explaining the wrestling or where the Von Erichs fit into this. It is an interesting time period, and you could do a whole different thing and not like have to deal with it, to just get into like the start of TV, the collapsing of the territories, these rising stars, the way the Von Erichs looked, right? And I think you see Harley Race and you see what Ric Flair looked like comparatively, right? And you're probably like, Harley Race has the belt like that guy?
How does this guy have how does this dude with a super dad bod?
And that's the feeling. Yeah, you put him next to Kevin or David or Kerry and you're like, they should have it. Those guys are athletic as fuck, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that was what happened. Like the Von Erichs came out and it was like, that's what looks good, right? And this is the time of Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? Like we learned a whole lot about bodybuilding and steroids and things, right? Kind of changed in the way that they looked. And that's what they brought in. Someone like Ric Flair really pushed like how a wrestler talked, like how a promo worked to a television, right? Because it had always just been to a crowd before, but he could play to the television. And so it's like this change of era that the Von Erichs were part of, I think is pretty interesting, but you'd have to spend a whole thing on that, right?
Yeah.
What
There's
in
much
that
more.
in doing that, I think they do something that I do really like, that they don't do the Han Solo thing where we learn everything about them gets explained to us, right? Everything happened to Han Solo in one weekend that defined Han Solo.
Yeah.
Are you talking about Solo, a Star Wars story?
Yeah. He got the Millennium Falcon.
The
He met
checklist.
Chewbacca. He got a gun. He learned all the phrases he needs to say, like all in one weekend.
Yeah, he did.
What a terrible piece of shit movie.
But
I love it.
yeah, you had these opportunities to do that kind of bullshit. So Kevin Von Erich doesn't wear shoes. Never mentioned.
Yeah.
Right? Never mentioned. It was one of his defining like characteristics as a wrestler. It came from previous injuries. He had knee injuries and he didn't like wearing the boots because of the weight and the sweat and slipping on him and stuff. And so he stopped wearing them and just kind of, that was his thing. And they could have like gone into the bullshit and someone could have asked him why he's barefoot and right, like kind of the things you would
Yeah,
expect
Pam
in a
could have
movie.
asked him all the questions about his barefootedness.
Yeah. And the fact of just like, it's
We're
there
at
and
a,
that
we're at
was
a
a
chain
thing,
restaurant. What are you doing? This
Yeah.
is disgusting.
Right? Yeah. And in the same way, like they don't explain to us about the foot. Like we don't even see exactly the fallout of the motorcycle accident for Carrie.
Yeah. It's
Right?
a big reveal. The movie treats it like a plot twist, which like in other movies I would have groaned at, but in this movie it feels appropriate. The way that it's executed feels tasteful. And it's sort of a subtle, in as subtle as it can be, kind of reveal of like, all right, he's got no foot. Like there it is.
Honestly, I thought the twist was that he was still alive. Like when I first saw it and he was like just sitting drunk, drinking a beer, holding the championship belt. It's like, I'm going to go for a ride, I think. I was like, oh, he's dead. Like I just knew he's fucking dead.
And you see that dark highway.
And
you're
yeah,
like,
the close-up
here it
shot of
goes.
him riding his motorcycle down a dark highway. He's kind of like swaying and not looking all there. I was like, oh man, he's fucking dead. And I was just shocked that he was still alive after that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you have this after David, this case of the two brothers who kind of get the warning to walk away. Right? And so I think that you are supposed to kind of feel that of like, oh, he's going to fucking wreck that bike and die. And they turn around and he's alive. And you would think, stop.
Yeah.
But he doesn't.
And then it's like, no, he's going to go back to wrestling. And then you're like, and he doesn't have a foot. And you're like, stop. Right? But he doesn't.
Yeah.
And the same with Mike. It's like he tears his rotator cuff and he has this freak accident infection
Goes into
that puts him into a coma. And
Yeah.
he comes back with brain damage. And you're like, stop. Like, right? Just,
Yeah.
you need to just live your life now.
That
Like, you
fucking
need to
press
bring off.
conference kills me. Every time I
man.
see
Yeah.
it, it tears me up. When he's sitting there and they ask him like, Mike, how are you feeling? And he just goes, fine. And like, it just, the weight that is applied to that delivery is that of somebody who is like, I don't have the energy to say much more. I really don't have the energy and I don't want to say much more. And looking at that scene showing Fritz and showing Kevin in two different perspectives, because Kevin sits there and you can see in Zac Efron's performance, this like beautiful moment where he is kind of waiting for Mike to say something else after he says that. And then he realizes that Mike can't. And he jumps in and he's like, we're all really happy to have Mike back with us. We're really, excited. And I think that Mike will be back. And it becomes it immediately when he says, I think Mike will be back, it switches to a framing of Fritz in the distance, like off to the side, looking at them, where you can see Kevin trying to kind of appease the father and also soften the impact of the questioning to Mike. He's trying to protect his brother and he's trying to appease his father. And it's so fucking wrenching to watch somebody try to navigate that.
And seeing Kevin basically be looped in and becoming part of the problem,
Yeah.
right? Where he is pushing Mike to get back in the ring, whether maybe he's not telling him directly, but putting out to the world, to the journalists that like, yeah, Mike's going to be back out there. Like that's creating pressure for him that doesn't need to be there. And I think the reason that scene is so jarring, I think, is that it like we find out very soon before that Mike is in a coma. We don't know he's not in a coma until they go to this press conference scene. The press conference is at the goddamn hospital. Like, you see the elevator bay in the background. Mike is still in his hospital gown with, like, you know, the one that you lace up the back that has your bare ass out the back. Like, he's probably rubbing his asshole on the goddamn chair, and he's having to give this press conference and tell people that he's going to come back to wrestling. It's just so it's so upsetting and jarring to see that happen. And you just see, like, I feel like there's no more apparent child abuse than in that scene. Like, that's where it becomes the most blatant and obvious. And it's like it's unclear at that point how old Mike is and how far he is out of high school, but not very. Like, he's way too young to be doing this kind of thing. And
I could tell you, like, that being in the hospital, that wasn't like the news set up and that was where they're going to do it. That was Fritz. Because
that was
again,
totally Fritz. Absolutely Fritz.
Let's promo it. And I hear Vince McMahon in the back of my head of, like, well, if he's going to come out injured, he needs a cast.
Yeah.
We need to see him in a hospital.
Let's put him in a gown in the hospital, and
the audience at home won't know if he's not in the hospital. Like,
and the fucking, like, the other sort of, like, the real gut punch there too is watching Fritz react to it. He's off to the side. He's, like, waiting. Like, they're trained actors. Like, they should be able to do this professionally. Mm-hmm. And he's sitting there with his arms folded, waiting for Mike to say that he's going to be back in the ring and that, you know, it'll take no time and whatever else. It reminds me of earlier in the movie when Kevin has his ribs fucking cracked and David comes in to speak for him. And Fritz just has that same disappointment of, like, Kevin, I thought you could do it, but you can't. So David has to do it for you. And the same thing of, like,
so
Mike,
he just thrown into a concrete
and here's
floor.
Kevin. Yeah.
Off
it's like,
script. Like, he wasn't preparing for that mentally or anything.
That's what they'll do in those matches, Dixon. That's what they'll do.
That's how they test you.
That's how they test you.
Fritz's answer to everything is you just gotta white knuckle your way through it and be man enough to actually, you know, be a champion and come out on top.
Yeah, watching Mike do that press conference and seeing Fritz lower his head, not because he's like, oh my God, my son's not ready to do this again and he really wants to, but, like, oh my God, my son is fucking this up, is the exact internalization that Fritz has. And you're just like, dude, your fucking son just went into an anomalous coma. The doctors explained it as anomalous. They said it doesn't happen often, but it can, and it did to your son. And he's just like, give him the press conference. Oh, he's fucking up the press conference. I can't believe this. It is the most entitled and selfish bullshit. And yeah, I mean, like, that's why I felt good when Fritz got choked out. And that's why I felt nothing when that happens. I was like, good.
When Harley Race hits Kevin on the back, you mentioned that, and it's like, good job with the audio cuts out and the way they frame it and shoot it. Like, the pain that he's in, it's clear as soon as he hits it. You're like, oh fuck. And then he has all this trouble getting up. He has to get back into the ring by the count of 10 because wrestling rules are always bizarre. He gets in at 7.
9.5?
Yeah, he gets in at 7, right, John? And Fritz calls him out on it. And what's your thought on that? I'm like,
oh my God,
you go in at 9. Like, he should be complaining that he went in at 7. He went in too early, not that he looked.
Yeah, he didn't, like, play it to the crowd enough.
Yeah. I was like, he was doing it perfect. He looked fucking injured.
He was so pumped full of adrenaline from taking that hit, and not being able to pay attention to what was actually going on. I mean, that's that kind of thing where, like, what do you fucking chastise somebody who was in a suplex who fucking had their neck break recently or some shit?
Why didn't you pull your head? Why didn't you pull your chin forward? Yeah,
pull your chin forward. Do what you were supposed to do. Do how you're supposed to do it. And that's like, I mean, that's wrestling. It was like on the way to the podcast, I was talking to Dixon about how, like, what do you penalize, like, ballerinas because they might injure themselves in the middle of, like, a plie or something? They might pull a muscle or there's, like, extravagant, human mechanisms at play, the muscles, the bones, like, everything else within wrestling. It is a violent ballet. There is this moment of which you could just be completely cracked on a cement floor. And how are you supposed to recover from that? And anybody chastising you about it even if they've been through it, they obviously have been through some other trauma where somebody did the exact same thing. It's the perpetuation of abuse. It's this constant cycle of like, why couldn't you just fucking get up when you should have? I don't understand why you couldn't pull yourself up by your bootstraps and fucking do it. Just do it. So that was kind of my take when he did that. That was also like when Sasha and I were watching the movie. Sasha didn't really want to watch The Iron Claw with me when we started it. Not this time, but before, because she didn't really watch it with me for this episode. But prior, when we started watching it, she was kind of like distant. And the moment that his ribs hit the floor and he cracked, she was like, oh, fuck. Like, what is this? And the rest of the movie, she was just gripped, like spellbound to how horrific a lot of wrestling could be. And she was like, that father's a fucking asshole. That's an awful person. Yeah. And she was just gripped by that, like that drama. And the mom too, whenever they were like, she was like, you need to settle it between your brothers. Sasha was like, who the fuck says that? Why would they say that? And she was compelled to watch and understand this family and their dynamic from that. So that was my take on Sasha's.
Darla watched with me, and definitely that like first moment with the mom, I was like, fuck you. Like he just immediately like, you don't say that. And the same when he like ranks the kids. Yeah. And it was just like, both of those two things just immediately gave you like as bad vibes from parents.
They both seem so disinterested in being parents, right?
Yeah.
Like Fritz wants to be a coach, not a father.
Yeah.
And the mom just seems to not want to be involved at all. Just like she's I don't know if she's so dead inside from like Fritz's wrestling career and how that's damaged their marriage, or from Jack Jr. dying or whatever it is. But it's just, man, it's a shit family.
Yeah, it sucks. So the mention with Harley Race of like, that's what they do to you, it doesn't necessarily go into that. I wonder if that everyone in the audience necessarily gets the like, seasoned guy is giving the new guy a bump, right? Kind of fucking with him a little bit more than you would.
Hazing of sorts.
Yeah, kind of, hazing him in for sure. And that, the sort of things that impacted Kevin beyond his family, as far as where he fit in career-wise, and the, the early success with David, a longer-term success with Carrie.
Yeah.
But Kevin was always looked at as like the most like pound for pound best wrestler, if that makes sense. Like, could kind of go with anybody anyway, really just like what he was every muscle he could possibly get to the maximum, like perfect. But he lacked on the promos, and he also got just stiffed in situations. And it would have been interesting maybe to navigate the wrestling world a little more of like, it kind of, a lot of it seems like it's Fritz that's keeping Kevin back sometimes.
Yeah.
And not really getting to like, also the wrestling business is keeping Kevin back. That could kind of make you as an audience member just more of like, why do you keep putting up with like any of this? Right.
Well, because we get to that moment too where Kevin's like, I read through the books and you totally fucked me on like any of the accounting. And Fritz is like, I did what was right. You think that living in this house is a free ride? It's not. Yeah. And it becomes kind of, stereotypical sort of like boomer father, just like, you fucking pay when you live under my house. And I'm going to, siphon funds from you. It was almost like...
Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Oh, wait, you don't have any, you fucking asshole.
You don't even wear bootstraps, do you? You just wear underwear and you wrestle in them. And like, they have that whole moment that it just kind of reminds me of pretty much any, I guess like that is what I said, like the boomer kind of father, just like, you're going to like, pay, if you're going to live under my house and you're an adult now, you're going to pay. But at the same time, like getting something out of them, like, well, I'm going to also use you to fucking dig fences and do all this other shit. Yeah. And that doesn't count. That's totally unrelated to what I'm trying to take money away from you for. Mm-hmm. And so like when we get to that moment, we don't really get to dwell on it either. It really is like this, it's starting to thread that needle of, hey, we want to follow Kevin's journey through believing the curse, but we also want to follow Kevin's journey of figuring out that his dad was an asshole who was embezzling basically from him. And we don't have enough time to really explore either of them. So just fuck it. Like, let's just do both as best we can at the surface level. And we get, Pam and Kevin talking about how Kevin's not going to go home anymore because he doesn't want his kids to get the curse. And he wants to name his kids Atkinson and not Von Erich. And then we also get him at the office just going through the books and being like, this is all fucked. Like, all of these finances are totally fucked. Whatever his dad was doing with the wrestling. What the fuck was their wrestling called? Championship wrestling?
WCCW, World Class Championship
Wrestling. That's what it is. Yeah. Versus the NWA. Is that what it was? Am I
Yeah.
mistaken?
Yeah.
Yeah. There we go.
Yeah.
With
Yeah.
Eazy-E and Ice Cube.
Fuck the police.
Yeah. So it's just that whole moment. It just exemplifies how the movie has like 2 hours and, like Dixon said, 2 hours and 12 minutes. What was it?
Something like that.
Something like that. And it's just like, yeah, fuck it. Let's just get through. You understand that he's being fucked over by his dad and that he's very distant from his wife. There you go. That's the tragedy of the Von Erich curse. And let's go from here.
Yeah.
I think they do a good job of getting into it, though. It's like there's a lot of information that they have to get through, but I think it lands well throughout, right? And it's like you definitely understand Kevin's relationship with his father throughout the film as you're picking up on these things. So I think it's it's trying to get through a lot of stuff, but I think it does it in an effective way.
I mean, they still show the tenderness between them too. Like, they sit when they're waiting for Mike to get out of his surgery, they sit together in the waiting room. Like, there's not like a distance and there's no, opposition there. He's always, for most of the film, he is always still with his father, sitting with him, talking with him, trying to reason with him. And it is only towards the end of the film when Carrie kills himself that he really loses it and is like, I told you, I tried to tell you, and you didn't fucking listen. And now I'm going to choke you out here in the middle of this field. That's where it has to happen. And that's where you get it.
Well, after Carrie calls Kevin and Kevin,
that scene
is super concerned. Yeah, that scene's real rough. The first person, Kevin, he turns around and he calls home.
Yeah, he calls home,
right,
he calls his
and
dad.
says like, you gotta help, and then after that, when he chokes his dad out, it's really that realization of like, I don't know why I kept thinking that you cared enough that you would do something, that you would help, right? Because the dad says on the phone something about like, why don't you go help him or something, right?
Yeah,
kind of almost
between
says
you
that
two.
like, that sounds, it's between you two. Yeah, again is repeated.
And then when he's lashing out at his dad and choking him out, his dad is like, he called you for help. Where were you? What did you do? And it's like, Jesus Christ, like, he calls dad, like, I think Carrie's in trouble. He's going to hurt himself. Like, I told him to come to the house. I'm on my way. Like, just make sure you watch him when he gets there so he doesn't do anything stupid. And he can't even do that, right?
Yeah.
Like, he's like, I'm too busy doing yard work or whatever the fuck he's doing. Like, that's more important.
Putting a fence in on this perimeter that anybody can get into. And let's talk about the afterlife sequences, because there are some.
Man, I love that scene.
There's that scene, and there's even before that, like when David passes away, you have a moment.
The mom
where,
kind of sees him in the background.
the mom is like watching wrestling, and then he's on the stairs, and he's kind of like see through, and you have this kind of like the spirit is always kind of with them. I felt like compared to other biofilms, like a lot of biopics like to do that tragedy porn where they're like, oh, your brother died and it'll always drive who you are. And we're not going to focus on that actor anymore because we don't want to pay for them to come into the movie and be in any kind of artistic sequences. Ray, I'm thinking of you. But like there's just those moments that they are supposed to define a character, but really the Iron Claw defines a family. And I appreciated that they continue to show flashes of what like the afterlife would be like in some way. There was either that they were there in spirit, or when Carrie dies, it is, and it's also not imposed upon the audience as this is what happened. Here you go, be happy. This is how they lived. The framing is shot such that it has to be a character feeling that that's what's there. When David is watching wrestling in spirit form, he's watching it with his mom, because his mom is also watching it and is like, don't know. She looks back to the stairs, sees nothing there. It's not really so much like, was he there or not? It's like she feels him. And then later, when Carrie commits suicide, that Kevin is just looking at his body and kind of like caressing him in a very, brotherly, sort of intimate, like I miss you way. And there's no way to get solace out of that except to imagine your brothers all reunited in like the afterlife, and watching that sequence. I'm curious, Ryan, what were your thoughts with how that was done?
And Carrie's note said, like, I want to go be with my brothers. And that is what the note said in real life, which is really just eats at you, like hits at you. And so I do think there's that certain amount of like, whether it's necessarily like within Kevin or within us as the audience, of that feeling of like, we hope that is the case, that they do get to be the brothers again, that they do get to go back and just be brothers, not wrestlers, just brothers, right?
And do it in an environment that is outside of the hostile home that they have grown up in, away from the awful shit that their parents have been putting them through. And like, maybe they can just be themselves. And, like, I love that it's such a peaceful scene of Carrie kind of, crossing the river Styx or whatever, into the afterlife, and them just hanging out on a dock, sharing a hug and having a good time, and just enjoying each other's presence. And, the idea that, obviously if you've listened to our silence episode, you may understand our doubts about the afterlife, but the concept that they can actually, have something together and to escape the horrors that they had to deal with in life and have some sort of peace together in death is very touching, the way that they pull it off. Yeah.
Mike has the guitar. David has the world championship belts. And, Carrie has
Carrie's
his foot back.
Yeah.
And Jack Jr.'s there, he's there to greet them. And that's such a cute scene too, of watching Carrie be like, hey, you must be my big brother, to like a little child who's just excited to meet him. And it's so sweet. And they all hug and put their heads together. And it is, I will say that scene is the closest to like an Oscar bait scene in this movie, but it earns every part of it. And it feels so good to see it. And it makes it even worse that this movie was completely snubbed for Oscars at all. But like that was just, beautiful.
I in my, movie awards post I always do, I gave Sean Durkin best screenplay, because I thought it was just absolutely incredible. The way that they were somehow he's able to pull this off and have this hopeful view at the end of the film. I'm like, I don't know how you fucking did that, man. Like,
I think being able to compress all of that in there, I think that it pulls off the family beats, the family dynamic the through point of like the curse, the relationship with their father, with each other, their relationship with wrestling. I think all that gets nailed like perfectly, and that's really the focus of the movie. And I think to know that, like, going in and being like, you could have all these different, and that's the thing with a biopic, right? It's like there's so many facets to the real world that nothing is that simple and clean to put into a story. You have to kind of like mash it into that. And they picked kind of, I think, the things to probably cut enough to keep this a story that's like watchable in of itself on this focus of this one path. So I think we're kind of winding down if we're getting to the final scene.
I do want to talk briefly about the little like post-credit sequence. Here's a picture of the real family thing, because I thought that landed really well, and I was shocked because I hate that every time it happens in a movie where there's a biopic and then they're like, here's a picture of the real guy, look at how much the actor changed his body to look exactly like this person. Like I feel like Christian Bale won best supporting actor for The Fighter just because he like looked like they showed the post credit scene of the guy, like, oh my god, he looked just like him, he lost so much weight and he has the exact same weird body shape. But I feel like that scene never ever works. Like, this is the first time I've ever liked that scene where they're like, this is what this is what happened to the family and here's where they are now. And like, there's always too much that's tried to be communicated in that type of thing, and text on screen and random still shots. But man, I thought it worked so well where, they're able to kind of wrap up Kevin's arc where he had always wanted to just have a big piece of land where all his brothers could live together. And, he couldn't get that, but he had a big piece of land where all his sons and their families moved there and, were able to have a big family environment together. And, they have this family picture of all of them there, and somebody like throwing a baby way too high and into the air
dangerously high
to be safe. But I thought it was just so touching the way that it ended. And I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts on that scene and, generally how you feel about those types of scenes in biopics.
Yeah, they're hit or miss. I do feel like they're particularly exploitive. Like they know exactly
they know
where
exactly
are,
what they're doing.
Yeah, I do think this one plays off well because you're right. It isn't like a wall of text or like multiple, like over and over again. It's not a bunch of pictures of every possible.
It's just one picture, yeah.
Or it's just like, it's just the one key point. It's the amount of information you need to know. Interestingly, so I did mention the dark side of the ring. And if someone is really like wanting to know more about the wrestling world in the negative way, that is an amazingly put together series. They have their episode on the Von Erichs, and the ending of that one, they interview Kevin at his house where he's barefoot. It's in Hawaii, and it's this like serene, calm thing. And the way Kevin talks is chill and like at one with the world, like at peace with all of it and all the things. And his family's there, and you see him interacting with his family. And it's kind of the same feeling. It's interesting that like, in both those situations, you're like, wow, we had to pack a whole bunch of tragedy. It's not one wrestler we talked about, like on most of these episodes. We packed a ton of tragedy in one episode, and similarly able to, like, because of Kevin and like, and who he was and how he was, that you're able to like come away with this, someone came out unscathed and better and created a better future, for their children and all that, I think is something, right? That is rare as this tragedy is rare there. And I think they got that through.
Yeah. And I think too, they play that song over that scene that
I Want to Live That Way.
Mike was playing. Yeah. In his, that scene is so good where he's like, he's 17, his band gets a gig to play at UT Dallas, and his mom is like, no, you're not setting foot on a college campus. Like, you're too young for that. And his brothers all sneak him out and take him out there. And there's this beautiful moment of them kind of all enjoying each other's company.
It's the calm
and
before the
appreciating
storm.
Mike's talents.
Yeah.
And, then they play that song over the end, I Want to Live That Way Forever. And it's on the nose. I get it. But I don't know. I think it just works
just
really
perfect.
well.
It's perfect. Doesn't matter if it's on the nose. It's perfect for what it needs to be. And yeah, like I feel like that's the same thing. For me, I can take it or leave it when you end a movie with like, here's the images comparing how close this person looks to this person, or what they fucking went on to do with their lives. The biopic kind of like, depending upon how it's told and what the message is, it really varies for me and how I could buy into it. There's some stuff where I'm like, this fucking Oscar bait, and other stuff where it genuinely does feel like this person fucking struggled, and I'm going to give them it. Like, fuck it. Like, I wholeheartedly embrace what this crawl or text would be. For this movie, I mean, considering I had already talked about how my brother and I looked at each other after and were like, holy fuck, the Texas tornado was Carrie, and this was like everything you went through. It's hard not to see that and be like emotional that there was something positive that came out of this, that it wasn't just a situation where the entire movie was oppressive and bleak and like all these people died and now just go live your life and think about that. Like, it never felt like the crawl and or text after talked about how you should be thankful for what you have. It just was like, no, Kevin, like, he found a way to deal with it. He has a family. He has love. He has what he always kind of wanted, not in the way he expected, but in a way that matters. And I was like, yeah, I like that. I want that. I'm perfectly content to take that as the conclusion to this film. So yeah.
I think it's that they like set it up. Like, right,
Yeah.
you're saying it like exactly what it comes off of, and it's like that. The movie was setting that up.
Yeah.
And it isn't this like, oh, we need to tell you what happens. Like sometimes there are those ones that are like, well, we need to tell you what happens. They give you something.
Yeah, we forgot about this part, and here's how it fucking goes.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, let's just mention this at the end.
Yeah, or it's like you said, it's kind of like trying to show how good they were at nailing it. And this one really is the like, we're trying to put the bow on like Kevin.
Yeah.
And who he was.
We're
And that's
not
exactly
trying to
what we need.
destroy you with he used to be a brother and now he's not anymore. Instead, we're building you up with like, not only did he continue to play football with his kids, but now he has fucking grandkids and they all have a great time together. And, you know, something beautiful came out of this.
And they don't ever show you the one photo they show is a big family photo, and it's like everybody in it is too small to identify.
Yeah.
So you don't even know which one is Kevin. And like they don't show you a close up, like, oh, look how Zac Efron transformed himself. They don't show any old pictures of them wrestling. It's just the one family photo, and it just adds such a nice, hopeful closure to the end of the film, and finishes Kevin's arc as a character, going from a guy who just wanted to spend time with his family to somebody who physically could not do that because they kept dying, to then someone who is able to achieve that again at the end of the film.
Yeah. Let's I would say let's wrap it up and give our opinions. I definitely enjoyed it. I know the tragic history of the Von Erichs and you know, and a lot of wrestling, so it is a good target for me. I feel like it worked. It wasn't like I came away super frustrated about any of it. Like, as you can go into a biopic, you know too much, and then you're upset that it didn't get all of the things. Like, I kind of understand some of the choices that they had to make. As a movie, if I like step back a little bit further from that, I think it's good. I think it's really put together well. I think the beats are hit. The acting is good. You're right. The screenplay and how they pull it off. It does feel kind of like just the same. Like, it's like that first part of the movie is you're learning everything, and then it's just sort of this like extended oof through the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
Not necessarily up and downs, not necessarily like a classical like climax tension release like maybe you might expect in another movie. There definitely is a release at the end, like it all finally comes down, but it kind of just like goes up to suck and then lives at that level and then comes off of it at the end.
Yeah, it does.
And so it's tough. I think it deserved to be talked about in the awards, but I do kind of come away of like, it's not an excellent, like nails everything kind of movie, but it is a good movie, very good movie. John?
Well, Ryan, I tell you one thing. Come this episode's release, there's going to be a lot of people out there who are asking me, John, should I watch this movie? And I'll tell you one thing. You absolutely fucking should. I wholeheartedly will fucking recommend, with the power vested in me as one of the co-hosts of this podcast, The Iron Claw. I think that it is going to firmly grab itself around your fucking noggin and push you down into the dirt. But then it will show you the brightness of the sun in the sky after. And that's what I say about The Iron Claw, Ryan. That's what I say.
Well said.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I channeled my best wrestler.
If I do a wrestler impression, I'm just going to do Trump. So.
Yeah, no, I was like, you're going to fall into Trump. I just fall into Vince McMahon, so.
Yeah, I know you do.
I guess I could do Hulk, maybe. Hulk Hogan.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody
yeah,
does
yeah.
Hulk Hogan and Macho.
Yeah, I mean, I really, really enjoyed this film. It was in my top 10 of 2023. I think watching it this time, I may have had it a little too low. Like, is a really, really great movie. I gave it 4.5 out of 5 on Letterboxd. It is devastating. Like, prepare yourself going in. It's not going to be a fun time, but man, it's just really, really well done. Would highly recommend it.
I definitely had that thought about Killers of the Flower Moon, that both of these movies have that, like, how much can one person take?
Yeah.
And also, is this all real? Like feeling when you walk away from them, right? Because it's just so much. It just feels so fucked up.
And the answer is no, it was worse than this.
Yeah. In both movies, we kept even more shit out because we couldn't.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Whew, all right. I've been your host, Ryan King. Joining me as always,
John Garcia. I've expended all of my wrestling promo material, so I'm sorry, folks. You're not going to get any other theatrics from me.
That's from John Iron Eyes. He'll watch anything.
Yes, correct.
All right, as well.
Michael Dixon.
We love the Iron Claw, don't we, folks? It's a big, beautiful movie. Some people are saying it might be the best movie. Thanks for putting up with our bullshit.
If I made it, it would have been the Golden Claw. I'm just saying.
The Gilded Claw.
The Gilded Claw. Hey there, movie buffs, TV toughs, and all listeners in between. John here from the Afterthoughts podcast. I just wanted to drop in at the end of this episode and say thanks for listening. If you've got afterthoughts of your own to share, hit us up. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at The Afterpod, or jump into a conversation on our Discord server. You can find info for this and more at theafterpod.transistor.fm. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.